We are going to finish up Genesis chapter 12 tonight. So, it's been, 3 weeks, I think, 2-3 weeks since we met last time to actually go over it. Last week we had the budget discussion. And so, what happens in the first part of this chapter, the first 10 verses, first 9 verses? Anybody remember what's taken place? Don't remember, yeah. Abram is called. So it's the calling of Abram. He's called to leave his family, to pick up, and to go. Where is he supposed to go? He doesn't really know at this point. But he does. He follows the call. He just goes. Wherever God leads him, he moves. So they went as a family from Ur to Haran up north, and then they went through all of Canaan down to the Negeb, which is the southern tip of Canaan. And that was the promised land. And so God was showing him the promised land. And along the way, he did something that I think is important. What did he do on his journey along the way? He built altars. Yes, not just one. He built altars over and over as he was going. Why is this important? I'm sorry? Absolutely. Yes, he was honoring the Lord, and he was proclaiming the name of the Lord, right, in a pagan world. And this is important, because I think what we'll find later in some of these stories, they've heard of the Lord, or Yahweh. We'll find these stories where maybe that Yahweh's name is known. They may not really know who he is, but they've heard the name. And I think, and this is just my opinion, but I think that this is directly because of the altars he set up along the way. Altars had significance. And we talked a little bit about naming things and how that was an important thing, that they named places and how they were reminders of what took place at those locations. And so I think that's really an important piece that we have to look at as we go. So now, in verses, we're going to read Genesis 10 through 12, 10 through 20. And I think I'm just going to read the first 4 verses, so 10 through 13 first. And it says, "Now there was a famine in the land, so Abram went down to Egypt to sojourn there. For the famine was severe in the land. When he was about to enter Egypt, he said to Sarai, his wife, 'I know that you are a woman beautiful in appearance, and when the Egyptians see you, they will say, "This is his wife." Then they will kill me, but they will let you live. Say you are my sister, that it may go well with me because of you, and that my life may be spared for your sake.'" All right, so we're just going to talk about those first 4 verses real quick. What happens, what's going on in the land of Canaan, or in the land right at this time? There's a famine. And it's not just a famine, but it's a severe famine, right? Somebody describe what a famine really is. I don't think that we in America, certainly in America, and there's nobody old enough in here to really understand famine. What comes to mind when you think of famine? Hunger, yes. Nothing to eat. Yeah, death. That's right. It's not a time of just struggle. It's a time of death. It's a time of survival, and so it says it was severe. So we don't know what caused it, and it doesn't really matter what caused it. Whether it was no rain, whether it was the locusts that came through periodically and wiped everything out, it really doesn't matter. The thing is that there was nothing. The land was desolate. And so there was nothing to being provided, or there was nothing, the land was not providing for them. So what does Abram do? He goes to Egypt, that's right. So he decides that he wants to travel there. Why does he go to Egypt? I'm sorry? Because there's what? I'm sorry. There's water there. Yes, the best water is there. Yes. There's likely something there, right? The effects of the famine may not be as great there. Was this what he should have done? Should he have left and gone to Egypt? Don't know. Maybe not. Why wouldn't it have been a good thing for him to do? Yes. What promises had been made to him? The Lord would take care of him. Does it say that Abram asked the Lord, or that the Lord told him to go to Egypt? No. He did it on his own. And I think that that sets up what takes place here, is that he did not follow the Lord in this, that he took matters into his own hands, and we see this over and over and over in Abram's life. It's this cycle of, well, God's given me this promise, now it's my job to protect God's promise. And that's kind of Abram's angle, is that he's trying to do a good thing by, well, I got a promise. If I die, promise can't go on. Well, there's some truth to that, but is it Abram's responsibility to keep Abram alive? Who's going to keep him alive? God. If he had stayed in the land of Canaan, would he have survived? Most likely, yeah, he would have, for sure. Why? Because God promised him he was going to survive, that he was going to be a great nation. So it's not one of these things, it's not just that he was going to survive, but he was going to thrive. And maybe it would have been rough for several years. We're seeing right now that life can get rough, right? Our world's kind of turned upside down right now. Things aren't what they were in 2019 when we were humming along. March of this year, our world kind of came to a screeching halt. And things have not been the same since. And I think that it's important for us to recognize that there are going to be times where that's going to happen. But does that mean that we just take all matters in our own hand and not follow the promises that have been given to us? What are some of the promises that God has given us? Yeah, that's right. That he'll not leave us or forsake us. That's right. Yeah. He's going to provide for us. He'll give us what we need, right? Maybe not what we want, but he's going to give us what we need. And Abram would have experienced that. I don't think that there's any doubt that if he just stayed faithful and stayed in the land of Canaan, God would have provided for him. I mean, that's who God is. His word is true. And when he says something, he's going to follow through on it. So, but Abram decides to go. Can any of you guys think of a situation in your life where maybe you went and did something either without consulting somebody, or maybe even asking or being told to do something, did the opposite, or did something else, maybe in addition, purely with good intentions, and it turns out really poorly, not going so well for you? I think we can all think of situations where we have done that. And I think that that's what's going on here. I don't think that Abram was trying to be disobedient. I really don't think that it was, but I think it was a matter of him taking things into his own hands, and it shows that he has some growth he has some growing up to do in his faith. And so throughout the story, as we're going through the next several chapters, we're going to see that take place, his faith grow. All right. Why do you... sorry, I'm looking at my notes. Okay, so I asked if it was okay for him to go to Egypt. We don't really know. I think there's an argument to be made on both sides of that. But what happens in the next 3 verses, I think, is very clearly sinful, right? Verses 11 through 13. How so? How is this sinful? What does he tell his wife to do? It's a lie, right? But only half lie, right? Technically, it's a half truth, right? Because she is his sister, right? They just have a different mother, right? So, a little white lie, right? That's okay. No. A half truth is a full lie, and that's where that's what happens here. So we're going to talk about what actually takes place. So, who is he really trying to protect? Himself. It's funny. He says they'll kill me, but they'll let you live. So tell them you're my sister. For your sake, of course, so that they'll leave me alone, so they'll treat me well. For your sake, it's going to be okay. This is really about you, but it's pretty clear that Abram's looking after Abram. Why? Because I'm the subject of God's promise. I've got to be. I've got to be what's protected. So therefore, we're going to do whatever I have to do to protect God's promise. So we see once again, his faithfulness and God's promise is a little shaky at best. It's not that he doesn't believe, because I really do. He believed the promise, but I don't think that he had a full understanding of God's ability, maybe, to fulfill his promise, and thought that he needed to take matters into his own hand. Anybody else guilty of that? Taking matters in your own hand? Yeah, I think that kind of goes without saying. Verses 14 through 16. This is when things get a little complicated. It says, when Abram entered Egypt, the Egyptians saw that the woman was very beautiful. And when the princes of Pharaoh saw her, they praised her to Pharaoh. And the woman was taken into Pharaoh's house. And for her sake, he dealt well with Abram. And he had sheep, oxen, male donkeys, male servants, female donkeys, and camels. So everything's going all right for Abram right now, right? Things aren't going so bad. This is kind of turning out all right. So there's a really good possibility that Abram had thought of this scheme because of the courting process. So maybe this was a scheme to accumulate some wealth, because at this point they have accumulated wealth as they've gone through, right? And actually, in chapter 21, we actually see this wasn't the first time that they had done it. Even this, that before they entered the land, he had said, "Honey, you are gorgeous. For your sake, let's say that you're my sister." And he said that, and they did that several times. So this isn't. These are just 2 times. We see it recorded twice, but it's alluded to that they maybe did this quite a few times. And this may have been a little bit of a scheme that they had going on, because you go in and say, "Hey, this is my sister," and all the young suitors come up and they want to court her. Well, how did they court back then? Yeah, they gave lots of gifts, right? It was all about impressing. And where's her father? Well, her father's not there. So who's in charge of her? Well, her brother. Her brother is the one who has to take care of her. So who gets the dowries? He does, that's right. So all along, he's getting this wealth. And so this is probably a little bit of a scheme that they have going on. Except, what happens this time? Well, the good thing is they could go in, they could get the stuff, and then say, "Well, we're moving on," and head out. What happens this time? Pharaoh. Yeah, the princes of Pharaoh take notice. What happens when Pharaoh takes your sister, quote unquote? Yeah, that's his wife now, right? And so it's a little bit of a sticky situation, because things don't go quite as he had planned, because Pharaoh's servants saw her, said, "Hey, this woman that came in here, she looked pretty good on your side. She'd make a good addition," because probably, I'm sure he had several wives, a good addition to your harem, ultimately. So that's what happens. She's taken in. And so how could this happen? Pharaoh does what he wants, right? At this point, Abram has no control. So now I think it's important that we understand that this does not mean that Abram's marriage was defiled sexually. It does not mean that anything there was defiled. In fact, it would have taken several months before Sarai was ready was prepared to enter into Pharaoh's presence. Think of Esther. We have that story to go back to. Esther, when she was chosen, does anybody remember how long it was? It was at least 6 months of preparation before she was able to go in. So to the king's, even in his presence. So I think that's an important thing for us to understand, that through all this, God still protected. God still protected Abram. He protected Sarai, and he protected his promise. That's the most important part. He protected his promise through all of this. So this obviously complicates things, because they can't just up and leave, like they probably had done several times before as they had gone through the land. And thanks for the stuff. We're going to keep going, and maybe we'll see you around. You know, that's kind of what I envision, or slipping out through the night or whatever, and being gone the next day. What are the potential impacts on God's promise? At least we know from the big picture, there really isn't. But what are the potential implications on God's promise from this? Yeah. At this point, for all intents and purposes, she's gone. So what does that do to the promise? Right? That's right. It's difficult to become a great nation if you've got nobody to carry on that heritage, right? So it complicates things quite a bit. So again, fortunately we have the whole story. We've read the whole story. We know that God is in control and that he's taking care of his promise. And that's why this story, I think, is in here, because it's an example to us that when we face issues that we maybe question, is God really for me right now? That we can fall on stories like this, that when we're doing something stupid, that he still is protecting us, that he is still there providing for us, and he is still going to be true to his promise to us. So what does Abram receive in return for his sister? A lot of stuff. He was a very wealthy guy. He was pretty wealthy coming in. He was really wealthy coming out, right? So he got a lot of things. Was this a good thing? Right. Yeah. Certainly not by the means of gaining wealth. It certainly was not a good thing. So what do you think must have been going through Abram's mind at this point as he's receiving these extravagant gifts? So they just keep coming. It's interesting. It says camels. Camels were really luxurious livestock at this point. So all the others, yeah, there are plenty of those. Camels, that's up there. You didn't just get camels. So this is Pharaoh saying, I'm Pharaoh. I can afford this. Here, take this. So what do you think is going through his head as he's receiving all of these extravagant gifts? What's that? He may have been thinking he had a good thing going. That's possible. I kind of think that at this point he's thinking, oh, what have I done? What have I done? Because I can't really out myself now, because that's for sure going to spell my death, right? If I say, well, actually, Pharaoh, she's my wife, that's probably not going to go real well for Abram. And he's got to be thinking, how is God's promise impacted now? He promised he's going to do this. I've messed it up. How can God fix this? I think that we probably have thought that a couple times. I've messed up really big time this time. How can God fix this? I look at myself, how can God fix this? And that's the beauty. For one, that's the beauty of the cross, that he did fix this. And there are still plenty of issues that this has, but he did fix this. That victory's already been won. That promise has already been made. That promise has already been sealed. And that's the wonderful thing about this. This promise to Abram already been sealed. It's a done deal. It's going to happen. All right. Verses 17 through 20. So I think that we have to ask the question, how can God's promise possibly be fulfilled now? Well, God steps in. God intervenes in the situation. And we're going to see that over and over in the story of Abram, and how God steps in. After Abram jacks it up, messes things up, does something stupid, God comes in and cleans up the mess. And, thank God that he cleans up messes. So let's read verses 17 through 20. It says, but the Lord afflicted Pharaoh and his house with great plagues because of Sarai, Abram's wife. Notice it's very clear there. It's Abram's wife. So that's not by accident, I don't think, that it points out that Sarai is Abram's wife. So Pharaoh called Abram and said, what is this that you have done to me? Why did you not tell me that she was your wife? Why did you say she is my sister, so that I took her for my wife? Now then, here's your wife. Take her and go. And Pharaoh gave men orders concerning him, and they sent him away with his wife and all that he had. So God steps in. What did the Lord do to Pharaoh and his house? How do you think they figured out? Yeah, they caused plagues. How do you think they figured out that it was because of Sarai? One of these is not like the other. In all likelihood, she's the only one not affected by these plagues. Right? So it's pretty easy to see it's you, and so to say that okay, these guys were brilliant, by deduction they figured out it's got to be her. So they go and talk to her, and I'm sure at this point she fesses up, well, he's actually my husband. And so then he comes and talks to Abram. So how does Pharaoh react? I'm sorry? Shocked, yes. He's shocked. Why would you do this to me? Do you understand what you brought upon me and my house? Because of your shenanigans? Our actions have so many consequences that go beyond just the initial action. And we're going to talk a little bit about some of these consequences that Abram's going to experience later on. So I think it's interesting to see that Pharaoh appeared to have a higher regard for marriage than Abram did. If you'd told me she's your wife, I wouldn't have taken her for mine. Take her back. She's your wife. That's interesting to me. So Pharaoh had it within his power to just kill Abram right then. He could have said, you know what? You lied to me. I'm Pharaoh. He didn't even have to say anything. He could have said, kill him. Who did that? David. Think of that. So it's interesting to me sometimes that we see people who are professing Christians who are sometimes morally bankrupt. We need to be better than that. That's important for us. If we're going to live out a life that honors Christ, we have to be better than that. And it's not about being legalistic. It's not about doing this for the sake of doing it or to gain points. It's because we need to be better than that. Our God deserves better than that. Our God deserves better than deceit, than murder that we've seen here. We see examples all over, all the time, of people who claim one thing and their lives reflect something very different. Don't let that be us. Even in the little things, it's important for us to focus on the little things and to make sure that our lives are reflecting a life that's truly been changed by Christ. That's important. So, what is the result of Abram's journey to Egypt? He got lots of stuff. He got a lot of stuff. He did. He makes it out alive, right? He makes it out with his wife. And he has, and what's that? And his stuff. And his stuff and a lot more stuff that he got in there. So did this end well for Abram? Kind of. On one hand, yeah, it did. God took care of him. God protected his promise. He left wealthier than he was before, but we're going to see that this actually complicates things. Next week, in the next chapter, chapter 13, we're going to find out that Abram and his nephew Lot are now so wealthy, they can't live together anymore. There are consequences to actions that go far beyond, that reach far beyond what we think that they're going to. Now, he can skate out of Egypt thinking, whew, dodged a bullet there. And we're going to see in chapter 21, you see he really didn't learn his lesson because they did it again. And potentially more times on there, but we have it recorded one more time. He may have been a little more careful, maybe. But he probably walked out of there saying, whew, I made it. But you're going to see consequence after consequence. Genesis 16, we're going to see this little Egyptian girl, Hagar. Where do you think she came from? What does it say he received? Male and female servants. Because of the decision that he made in Egypt, the deception, it really looks like God's promise is in jeopardy. Abram does so many things to mess it up, and God over and over fixes it. But it's so important for us to understand that the unforeseen, long-lasting consequences of our sin. But fortunately, we serve a God who is faithful to protect the promises that he has made. And that's what I hope we walk away with tonight out of this story, is that we serve a faithful, true God who is so powerful that none of us in here can change his plan. If he says he's going to do it, he's going to do it. There's no power, there's no disease, there's no enemy, there's nothing that the government can do, there's nothing that another religion can do to stop God's promise. We have that to sit on. We see this other country that could have, in this case Egypt, that could have really messed things up. But God is the King of Kings, and He's the Lord of Lords. And we can rest on that. So let's pray. Father, I thank you for your faithfulness. I thank you for your mercy in our situations where we just, when we really mess up and create really difficult situations for ourselves when we don't really need to. Lord, I thank you that this story is in here to show us that even when we make those bad decisions, Lord, that you are there to stay true to your promise. Father, I pray that we would remember during this season that you sent your promise to this earth to die as a sacrifice for our sins, that we may be made right with you. Lord, we give you the glory for that. We give you the honor and the praise for that. And I just pray that you would help us to keep that on our mind through this season. We thank you and we love you. In your name we pray. Amen.